So, how wide was that beach and where was that beach? Here's a 1944 aerial photograph by the Corps of Engineers. Here's that little rocky headland here. Here's that little structure, which is the first ferry dock at the mouth of the Columbia River here. And then it shows this large sandy beach extending out almost to the old dock here at McGowan. Also shows the road behind this little bit of open beach here and shoreline, which is vegetated. When I was in high school going to a walk there many, many moons ago, we had a history teacher, Washington history teacher named Pat Aslan. And she commented about when she was a young child in the 20s, versus a long time ago, both ways. She commented about there being a horse pasture and an orchard out in front of this area here. And in looking at this early Corps of Engineers photograph taken in 1944, yeah, that's plausible. There probably was more shoreline here because we know that the 1960, Pacific County vacated the plat of Chinookville. It was an early plat of Chinookville, which was right out in this area. And those lots had been so far washed away by the erosion of the beach that they were no longer considered viable lots, and so they disappeared. So we know that the shoreline here was a component of where people lived along the shore, where they thought they were going to live by a platted area, as well as the low tide shoreline, which makes up the sandy beach. And that's an important distinction. When you talk about the shore and the shoreline, you're talking about two types of environments. Another interesting feature of this is this large agriculturally enhanced area here. This is the old McGowan farmland area, which was in 1944, basically a big farm field. It grew up quite quickly. When you drive by there now, you see all of these young alders there. That's where that farm field used to be. And of course, here's the rocky headland there that I was talking about earlier. Now, where was James Swan in 1851? Well, I went out to that dock at a -2 tide, old ferry dock, and I went out as far as I could without getting too badly wet. I took this photograph and asked myself the question, could this be part of the old shoreline area? It just makes sense. Because I was trying to figure out, is this perspective that I have here approximately the same? And I've concluded, yes, it's pretty close. It's reasonably close. So that I think that the ferry dock, actually its location, is probably about 20 yards from shore, about 320 feet, maybe a little bit more. And that was about as far out as they would build the ferry dock because they were trying to get to low water. And then reading an old historical book on the story of Chinook, I came across an anecdotal reference to the ferry dock actually being excavated for a way for the ferry to come in. And that did, in my mind, solve an issue there, that the ferry dock itself was about as far out as they could drive piling and build a bulkhead, and then excavate slightly for a ferry, and that does represent a minimum distance of the old historic shoreline, at least in 1851, from the old town of Chinookville. I think it's very, very possible. It makes a lot of sense. The one photograph I haven't been able to take is the one that shows St. Helens and the sun coming up. And the problem with that is the bridge blocks the approximate view of St. Helens. And I haven't got the sun, I haven't got a shot yet in the morning on a -2 tide when I can actually get out there and get the sun coming up. Because I really do want to approximate this type of photograph to give a sense of where that shoreline was. If you turn and go west, and here we are looking at the old McGowan dock. This photo was taken in about 1890, in the late 1890s. You'll notice there's horse seining here on the beach. You'll notice also that the slope of the beach is quite steep here, quite high, tons of driftwood and drift logs along here. And if you look at the horse, they're not really in that, horses, they're not in that deep of water out here. It's something that men and horses can work in. And I think this logically also refers to a swan notice as a beach up to 50 rods deep, or around 800 feet deep. This at low water, I can see this beach easily going out 800 feet or more. And that makes sense. That depth of beach makes a lot of sense. The driftwood, I want to talk a little bit about the driftwood. Following the construction construction of the dams on the Columbia River, one of the main purposes of some of those dams, in addition to generating power, was also for flood control. And also, as logging practices developed, we lost what was commonly fed down the Columbia River, which is trash, woody debris. If you ever go to any wild river in British Columbia or Alaska, and some of the smaller rivers in Oregon and Washington, when you get down to tidewater or near tidewater, you'll notice full-length trees, root wads, debris like you can't believe. Debris so heavy and so big that it actually thwarts your use of the shoreline because it is there, it's in your way. That's the way the Columbia used to be. It's no longer that way, so we don't get the massive quantities of drift that we used to get. Why was that important? That was the source of wood, and the wood was the source of cultural use by the Chinooks. So any number of trees, cottonwood trees, alder trees, cedar trees, fir trees, pine trees, spruce trees, you name it, came down. If you read some of the early accounts of many of the men coming into the Columbia, they always comment about seeing full-length trees causing a hazard to navigation to their boats at the mouth of the river. So you have these trees of immense length, 150 feet, 175 feet, complete with the root wad still attached and all the branches and limbs. That was the way it used to be. One of the things that James Swan noted in 1851 is that the mills were so common that you would see, obviously, timber with cut ends. That was already dominating the landscape. I took another photograph to try to approximate the one I just showed you. You have to laugh. This is photo technology in about 1895, and this is photo technology today. I get to have fun at my own expense. This is a sandstone formation that I've never seen in any of the early photographs. That's that spruce tree right there at the tip of McGowan. And as you can see, this is a -2 tide. And there's simply no way I can walk out on a sandy beach out there. It's just impossible. And so we don't get to do this like they did. I couldn't go out and sing salmon, for example. Here's another great photograph taken near the end of the McGowan dock. It shows again the immense trash, woody debris along the shoreline. Shows the dock, which was built with non-pressure treated piling. It was amazing that it survived as long as it did, because it was in a position to be damaged by the waves very much. One of the interesting ecological features of this is the dead, tall, dead trees here. Bill Garvin, who was a descendant of the P.J. McGowan, and I were talking one day about the fire ecology of this area. And there was, in his mind and in my mind as well, there was clearly a very large fire that came through here at some point in the past and killed and burned down a lot of trees, such that years later the trunks are still standing. But obviously it didn't affect all of the area, because here you have trees that look like they survived